So Nick, we're into 2020 right now.
Yeah.
I personally have already picked my first favorite movie of the year. It's The Grudge from 2020. It's my favorite movie that I've seen released in 2020. I've also picked my worst film of the year that's been released in 2020 so far. And it's The Grudge from 2020.
Yeah.
So, in all fairness, Nick and I today we're going to talk The Grudge 2020 from director Nicholas Pesce, I think, and we're gonna discuss the merits of where we think it'll actually end up in that best to worst conversation for 2020. Because right now, it's my favorite movie I've seen so far this year, but it's also my least.
One thing when you watch this movie, get used to this color.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. We maybe we'll tint this video yellow, and you can just see the abundance of it throughout the entire review.
All right.
But that's going to be our talk today on Kyle and Nick on Film, the fourth film in the American Grudge series, The Grudge 2020. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Kyle and Nick on Film. As I said before, I'm one of your hosts, Kyle Goethe.
I'm Nick, host of St. Paul Filmcast, we can find on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, and Stitcher.
All right, and today we're going to talk The Grudge 2020, which is the fourth film, technically, in the American Grudge series.
If you want to do the lineage, it's a little confusing because it started with short films, and then some independent films called The Grudge, The Curse, and The Curse Part 2. Then drew on The Grudge, and then that got remade.
Well, and then drew on The Grudge Part 2. And then even in Japan, there was Ju-on Black Ghost, Ju-on White Ghost, Ju-on the Beginning of the End, Ju-on the Final Curse, and finally, maybe the most important of all, a crossover film with Sadako from The Ring, Sadako versus Kayako, released in 2016. So there's a long lineage in Japan. America, we had our Grudge 2004, I believe it was, with Sarah Michelle Gellar. We had a sequel with Amber Tamblyn, and then a direct-to-video, The Grudge 3 in 2009, which most notably featured Shawnee Smith of the Saw franchise. So it's been laid dormant for over a decade at this point. We finally get this film, which is kind of more of a sidequel in a lot of ways. It takes place, before, during the Sarah Michelle Gellar Grudge film, 2004 to 2006, if I'm correct, right?
It's supposed to, right?
Yeah. So, they're kind of in that murky water with the first three films. They didn't give a specific timeline, so now we kind of have one with this film. Basically following, one of the people that was going to the, I think, Seiki house before Sarah Michelle Gellar. She leaves and goes back to America and takes the curse with her, which is a common theme in a lot of the films that we've discussed throughout the series. So kind of, very similar, storyline to a lot of the other films. She takes the curse home with her, and we follow, in true Grudge fashion, multiple families living in the house, experiencing the house, taking it with them, and kind of spreading the curse. I know you mentioned before we started the video today, like how there's a big portion of J-horror that focused on like viruses, almost like like The Ring is a technological virus, if you will. The Grudge is a pain and depression almost virus.
So the big fashion in the early 2000s with Japanese and maybe even entirely of Asian horror was this concept of something happens, it sparks, and it almost like a virus spreads. It could be a concept, it could be something like a literary device where we have The Ring, but it contaminates anything, and everybody could be a victim. That was a nice, surprise, refreshing thing about Asian horror at the time, was nothing was sacred. It could be a baby, it could be a cat, it would be something loving, and then it would get infected. And it's almost treated like STDs, or somehow it blossoms and it gets charged and works, and that's why I think the other concept of a slow-pacing movie, that these were introduced as well.
Yeah, I think that's something where American cinema is not used to that, kind of the way that J-horror was done.
Yeah.
And so you get a film like the 2004 Grudge American release and the sequel, both directed by Takashi Shimizu, who actually created the series in Japan.
Yeah, he
basically
did it in
took
college.
his own thing. Yeah, and then he brought it over and basically remade, new stories with his franchise in America. He produced the third film. He had no involvement with this newer film. And kind of coming into it, it's been very touch and go. There was no review embargo. There was no early screening for critics, which is never a good sign.
So it's almost like the start of the story, which is the concept of stuff spreading and content. It's almost the evolution of how this has got made, too.
Exactly. And the film was pushed back. It was supposed to be released in 2019, released now at the beginning of the year. Came out with like an 18% Rotten Tomatoes score. We found out this weekend has an F Cinemascore.
Yeah.
And there's even like there's a couple people that I follow in the horror circle where like they love everything horror. Like they find something to love about even the worst of horror films. And they came out saying they hated the film. So I was walking in like really expecting a train wreck. And I gotta think like first thoughts in the film, it wasn't nearly as bad as I thought it was going to be. It also wasn't very good. I kind of came out of it going, it's fine.
When you watch the latest movie, the 2020 movie, I noticed a lot of where you expect to anticipate things that you relate to as from The Grudge, like a cat, the kids, the ghosts, the creepiness. It's almost like footnotes rather than it's place incident just to make sure we have it, to make sure it's grunge, rather than making it scary.
Yeah, I think if you took the slight amount of Kayako we got in the film and like the photo cameo to Shio, the child and the cat, if you remove those elements or minimize them as much as they did, you could take them out of the film and it would almost feel like it's not a Grudge film but just a haunted house movie. About a really haunted house. That was my biggest disappointment, was like, you know, my wife pointed out, she saw the film with me, like she thought like the actual like makeup effects on the ghost was cool. I said, but at the same time, they're cool for a horror movie, but I don't think they just didn't make me feel like this is The Grudge. Like that first opening where we do get a moment to see Kayako, I was like, oh great, okay, we're really going to like the style
the
of
first
that.
intro, right?
And then they completely go without it the rest of the film, which I thought was odd because you've got like if it's the same Grudge curse moving from one person to the other, she's totally in white, and then it's everybody else is grimy. You know, it's kind of like this, like they bathed in sewage. Like, I was kind of like, you know, kind of tossed around with that too. I think the absence of the elements that made this franchise famous, or at least not tweaking them, but just flat out discarding them.
I agree.
Was I think a bad call for me because it kind of took me out of the feeling of like what this movie is.
Right. Because it's almost like they inserted, oh wait, there's a Grudge movie. We have to put this in there to make it as a. It's almost like almost like you put a post-it on there. This is a Grudge movie. Let's put it.
Yeah, that was maybe the studio note. Please include one Grudge, reference. The film does have a few like inner workings. I love that they had the original set from the 2004 film featured at the opening. It lets you know that this is part of the franchise, and I do like the way that storyline wise they expand, evolve slightly the mythology, but they do continue the mythology, which is important for me. Like my biggest fault with I think The Grudge 3 in 2009 was it's all set in one location, and it's spreading throughout an apartment complex in that film, but it all felt very small scale, whereas I like the feeling like that this follows you, like, you know, like you mentioned, like it is like a virus, an STD, like something you take with you and kind of move along, and it's disturbing in that way, and you can't avoid it. You walk in, it's you. So I really like that. I think, the one thing that they did really well is the cast in this movie is insane. Right. There are so many big name people, even like character actors that appear in the film that just blew me away. I did not expect to see all those.
No, there's some recognizable faces that you will see this, and one of the nice thing is Lynn Shay was in the movie. Yeah, she's very famous. Very famous. She's been in horror movies since the '80s, and her brother Robert Shay produced Nightmare on Elm Street and started New Line Cinema. So she's been in the horror film industry for quite a while, and it's nice to have her in there. She always gives her all, no matter what the film is. I love that about her.
That's true. I think like she elevates the material that she's in. And I think like she's become famous because of Insidious, but she's been character acting for years.
Oh, for years, yes.
I love seeing her when she pops up cameo wise, and I think she's in the original Nightmare on Elm Street as the teacher. Yeah, she's in a couple of the sequels too. I think just like passing by, and I think there's something about Mary. I always remember her. Magda.
Yeah. She's not afraid to go gross.
Yeah, she goes in whatever direction you want her to go in. Famous for her 4 Insidious appearances. She was in, I think, one or maybe both of the Ouija films. But people who seeing her here.
But people who do horror movies, it can transfer very easily to do comedy. There's very
it's all about timing.
It's all about timing.
And I think like she's tremendous in every single film she's in. I didn't like the way she was utilized in the film. There are certain things, she's a person who's living in this house. Yeah. So we see kind of the beginning, kind of like the mid for her. We see kind of where she is middle of living in the house, not when she moved in. And then we see the end of her story. And I think the way they utilized the end of her story, I thought was completely like silly.
It was.
It didn't feel like a Grudge moment. There's a violent scene with her that I was like, why? What's going on? And then of course, there's a scene of her like in a special care home.
Yep.
Where if she's involved in what's been going on with her this whole film,
you would not
leave her out.
You would not abandon her.
Like, there's just, for me, it's kind of like, my question I kept posing was, are you thinking about what makes sense in the film?
No, and that's one of the weaknesses of the movie, I think, is when the writing, there's no sense of continuity of the movie where somebody who's, okay, you go to a house and you see a child that's in the house by themselves, that should be a red flag. You should be contacting people constantly rather than you just sit there waiting patiently.
Yeah. And I think that was meant to do like an homage to one of the Japanese films.
Was.
But the thing is, like, in that film, it worked because it was done quicker.
Yeah.
Whereas this was a long arc for John Cho's character to show up in a house, see a child there, and just hang out. Like, especially in the day and age we're in right now, too, where, like, a person who doesn't belong in that house, going into that house, sitting with a child for multiple hours, like, you got to think optics when you're a character going into that situation. I would be uncomfortable sitting in a house with a child and something is wrong with that child. Like, I don't know that child. That would be weird for me. And there's the same thing to this. The film opens with a car that is found and a body inside it.
Yeah,
and they
which
say
is fast.
It's a very cool opening. I love how
start.
it like plays
I like that
in.
start. I did.
But then they say early on in the film, like, it's a service road. No one found it for months, or I think maybe even a year.
Yeah.
But then when we see how that car ends up there are obvious streaks of tires on the road. If you drove by that road, you'd be like, something's wrong here.
Yeah.
You would find what's going on. So, like, again, like, get rid of the tire tracks, because then you at least have the ability to suspend your disbelief on that. It's a lot of inconsistencies with just making the film.
Inconsistencies is the key with this movie. Especially if you're going to have a mystery in it, and we already know what happened, it's not really of a mystery. And then once the mystery gets resolved, then you hit us over the head to visually explain to us what some things we already know about. It gets kind of, oh, come on, you have to trust us. We actually are paying attention. There's a little bit heavy-handedness, that's what I would use, of characters. Like, you have the detective who's mourning the trauma of his partner and of his relatives, who's constantly chain smoking. He's very religious, but it's very overly done.
Yeah, Damien Bashir, who was in The Nun about 2 years ago, when he had all these like religious artifacts in his house,
in the movie,
I was like, is he a priest again in this
film? Right,
and then I was like, oh no, he's a cop. Okay, like it's very bluntly hit over the head that every time he's in frame, he's got to have something that lets you know he's a religious person. You don't need to hit us over the head with that, because he doesn't really ever bring it up either.
Right.
It's just like there so much. Like, so it's not really part of his character. It's part of the background.
Yeah. Well, if it's background, then it doesn't need to be.
That's so much.
So much. The other thing is of a lot of wasted scenes of things that took a lot of time in the movie that didn't need to be added. There's times of just knocking on the door, which I timed 30 seconds of just knocking on the door, waiting the door to. It's like you could cut that, and make it much more appealing. Which I understand is the emphasis for the Duran series is slow development, but this is just getting.
For a 93-minute film, I felt like it was going on for 2 hours by the time it ended. I did feel that, like, and not so much at the beginning, but just like the repetition of it all. And I think that's what one of the maybe like faults of the Ju-on series, though, is that there is a lot of repetition. Yeah. The Ju-on the Grudge film from Japan I watched is like almost a series of short films about people get into the house or get involved with the character, they get attacked, die, or they go home and kill someone, and then it moves on to the next story. And it's very similar. It's almost like just how you set up the scene.
Yeah.
And I think the scenes here are all set up the same way, so it's more bluntly obvious.
Yeah,
that's the same thing happening.
It's overhanded, and it's a little more blunt. I mean, you have a fire in the house, and then it turns to the street name, and the name of the street is Raybird. It's like, we caught that. I mean, it's
well, I think like there's a moment too. Andrea Riceborough, who plays Detective Muldoon, kind of the lead of the film. There's a scene where she brings her son to the station, and she says like, "I don't have a sitter." And Damien Bashir's character Goodman takes the son to a room, puts a movie on. She's on her computer looking at something, and it's like that entire sequence of taking her son to the station could have been eliminated. Didn't do anything for the plot whatsoever, and it's never touched on again. Nothing happens in that scene.
Right. It's almost like, and then they showed you an homage of cop comedies. It's like, we didn't.
The only thing I learned there was maybe that Goodman doesn't understand what's okay for kids because he shows the kid 48 hours. Like, but that doesn't have any bearing on the story.
No, it doesn't advance it. It just delays it, which is kind of frustrating.
Yeah, like I don't need to know what Goodman's favorite kind of cheeseburger is. Like it's a thing that doesn't add anything to the narrative, and that's kind of my biggest frustration with it. Was there were scenes where I was like, oh, what are they setting up? Oh, nothing. Okay.
Now the funniest thing is, and I talked about this many times before with Kyle. Sometimes movies, you find something in a movie, and then a lot of other movies do it. Kind of like I talked about with the reference of The Lighthouse or Aquaman. Then you have The Vanishing, and then you have the movie The Lighthouse. We have this again because in Doctor Sleep we had a ghostly appearance at a grocery store.
Yep.
And now we have it here. I'm gonna wait for the next movie. We have a ghostly thing happen. It's almost the same grocery store.
Well, yeah, it reminded me
that
of,
was
like,
in Doctor Sleep. Yeah.
The visual look of that reminded me too of a sequence from the Nightmare on Elm Street remake from 2010 where they're going through a pharmacy, I believe.
Yeah.
And it's the same lighting and the same overall like appearance of things, flashing lights and everything like that. Okay. Ironically enough, the music.
Gotta have the flashing lights.
The music was done by the Newton brothers who did the musical score for Doctor Sleep, so it's even more on the nose aware of it. Because I know when I saw that too, I was like, where's Rose?
Yeah.
Like,
where's Rose? Yeah,
which, by the way, if you guys want to check out our Doctor Sleep review, you can click the card right here and check it out. So overall, there's a lot of interesting character moments that didn't add up for me in the same way. No. William Sadler, God, I love William Sadler, and we get an appearance from him as Goodman's previous partner who had some issues with The Grudge.
You would know when you see his face. You've seen him many times before the movies.
Yeah, but I always think of him from Frank Darabont's film, Shawshank Redemption, Green Mile, The Mist. Of course, he played Death in the second Bill and Ted film. Demon Knight, a great Tales from the Crypt movie. William Sadler has done some good stuff, and I think again he's kind of like Lin Shaye, where he's always an additive. He always makes things better.
No, and he carried a lot of weight into it.
Yes,
he did.
My big flaw with him though is we got this makeup department that again really tried a unique look on the ghost. Yeah. They have a prosthetic that is used on Sadler for part of the film.
It actually looks pretty good.
It looks great, but it definitely hinders his performance. It made his performance more laughable when it shouldn't have been. There was something about it just didn't work for me, and that's frustrating. You never want a makeup appliance to be noticeably hindering a performance. It's kind of like you don't want CG to be noticeable.
The kind of like William Dafoe playing the Green Goblin in Spider-Man, who had a great Green Goblin face and then you put a helmet on him, and it's like.
Where it's that kind of bothered me. There's some costume choices in the film. The way they dress the little girl, the one that John Cho is checking in on when he goes to the house, their costume looks like it's out of the early 1900s. It doesn't make any sense for me.
Well, even the cars are 80s, even though it's supposed to be. So there's a mixture of not setting the right timeline of all.
Yeah. I think flaw-wise, again, I felt myself enjoying the complex narrative. Of jumping around in time.
No, there
more
is,
so than the straightforward narrative.
There's a good story in it.
Yeah, and
there is. Yeah.
I didn't find any flaws with it. I was kind of looking for something that didn't make sense with at least the timing of it all, because there's a lot that happens from 2004 to 2006. My God, 44 Rayburn Drive's it's inundated with
44. Which is, I think 44 is one of the short stories. It's like an homage.
Yeah. So Katasumi and 4 10 times. I'm not going to say it.
4
is that's in reference to a phone number, and also I discovered too that the number for 4 in Japanese is a homophone for shi, which means death. So that's kind of Takashi was using that in his way to kind of hint at it, I guess, which I didn't know. I thought that was kind of cool. So again, having the 44 show up again means that they know they're making a Grudge movie.
Now that you explained to me, adds a little more emphasis. I enjoy it rather than just looks like just putting numbers up there.
Yeah. I thought the music was fine. I thought the cinematography and the editing were, again, fine. But for me, it's something in those 3 areas did not end up to a tense film. No. I was never scared of what was happening in the film. There was one jump scare, and the film is inundated with jump scares. There was one that got the wife, where she really felt that one. But everything I felt in the film, I wasn't scared so much. I was interested in the mythology and where the story was going, but never really scared. And again, that comes from a guy that watches too many horror movies. It's tough to scare me, but I want to feel the tension building. And that's one thing I just didn't feel.
Yeah, I agree.
We're coming out of a timeline where even the worst of the Conjuring universe films builds tension pretty well, and I think this film never had tension. It's either a directing issue or cinematography or editing or music issue, which is interesting because again, you have editing from Ken Blackwell, Gardner Gold, who separately did films like The Nun, Don't Breathe, Hotel Artemis, some good editing work. Yes. Relatively new cinematographer. Yeah. But then the Newton brothers doing the music. They did The Haunting of Hill House. They did Doctor Sleep. So they've done some good work. something's missing in the
I agree.
accents.
This is like musicians who are really good at their music. Like you get a really good guitar player, a really good drummer, and a singer together, and they just can't make good music.
Yeah,
you know, sometimes it just doesn't. Yeah.
So I think like all in all, these people combined like have good abilities to them, but there's also to that translation piece of making Ju-on the Grudge from a Japanese property to an American property, and I never felt like even just the franchise as a whole was able to translate that well.
I agree.
Takashi Shimizu coming over to do the first 2 American films is interesting, but it's almost counterproductive because he's making a Japanese style film on American release.
And I think this is an authentic, excellent Japanese horror that does not ever translate well.
It's never fully translated. Yeah. You know, and I think that's been the issue is like, how do we make this film? And I think this one tries to Americanize it more.
Yes.
It loses a lot of the soul of what came out of the J-horror film.
Once again, Kyle explains it better than I could.
That's okay. But yeah, it's just that issue of like translation piece. But I do feel like even though like the Ring translation was probably the best version of a J-horror film to an American style film.
Yeah.
I think The Grudge as a franchise has done more work translating than The Ring did. Then you've also got things like Pulse, you've got things like Shudder, you've got so many of these like Japanese films that tried to translate. That completely failed. Yeah. And I think like this has been more successful film for film, but just never really hit where you could call it a workable home run franchise. Yeah. I had a lot of hope in this one. I thought the trailers looked really amazing.
Well, yeah, I think you're too heavy-handed with stuff, like with characters, with the lighting. And then you're not concentrating on where you should be focused on. I mean, spending time on knocking on doors, spending time of where we could cut that and really work on the tension building.
Yep. Yeah. Well, and there's a sequence near the end of the film where Andrea Riseborough's character goes into this house with the intent on stopping this curse. Yeah. She does some really dumb things when she goes into this house, like really like just beyond
and it's a staple of horror movies. People do dumb things. Yeah, but it's like over the top.
It's very dumb.
Yeah,
like when you're trying to smart person who just completely misunderstands like how science works. You know, like,
if you're trying to avoid like a spirit that's coming after you, and you go in a closet, and then you answer your phone that went off. Then
what was that about? Oh my gosh! Like
I know that took me out of it.
Yeah. There was a moment for tension. Your phone is ringing. Like turn it off and get it rid of it. And it rings like 5 times. And this is after he sees someone walking down the hallway. He knows he's not alone in this house.
When I went to see it, people in the theater are like, "You're an idiot." There's literally,
This is a film of audible groans at times, and I think that's where you completely took me out of the film.
I agree.
That's what it was. Is that it didn't even create tension. It lost so much tension that I exited the film.
Yep.
And it took me a bit to kind of get myself back in. And I think, of course, our ending tag of the film completely didn't work. Because it was something we expected to happen. They didn't do anything interesting with it.
No.
And it didn't. It just didn't make any sense with the narrative. Like after our finale, we have this tag. The finale doesn't connect to the tag in any way, shape, or form, and it presents a character who we feel like maybe learned something, but then didn't learn anything at all. And it really took me out of the film, like a very poor ending, which is one of those reasons why I think the Cinemascore was so low, is people left the theater going, that was a bad ending. For a movie that overall was fine, I felt. So yeah, Nick, final thoughts on The Grudge 2020, where does it sit? Where do you think it's going to sit in your top or bottom 10, going into the next couple of months here?
This needed a lot of work. This is kind of disappointing. I'm just going to give it a below par. Low average. Mm-hmm. There's definitely, and we get that a lot nowadays with January horror movies, so it's not really all that surprising. It's just kind of
yeah, for me it's kind of like, again, I thought the posters looked great. I love the idea of continuing the franchise and not rebooting. I'm a big fan of finding something good, a kernel of something good to take out of a franchise
and the makeup
and continue it.
Yeah.
And the makeup was good, out of place. Good out of place, you know. I like the posters. I like the trailers for it. I was genuinely excited for the film until this, like if a review embargo never lifted and the critics never screen it. It's kind of like you get nervous. Like your tension. I had more tension building, waiting to find out how the film was going to be than I felt in the film. Overall, like I felt fine. It wasn't the train wreck I expected it to be, but it was far short of where the film could have been.
Yeah.
So for me, it's just
okay.
Nah.
Yeah.
But that's our review for The Grudge 2020, guys. Comment below your thoughts on the film if you had a chance to see it. Don't forget to like and share this. Check out our Patreon. Kyle and Nick on Film has its own Patreon page. The link is down in the description, so you guys can check it out. Join in the conversation there. And you can even, if you'd like, help influence some of the films we're going to talk about in future episodes.
Yeah, we like your input.
Yeah, definitely. So you can find us, on Twitter at KNOnFilm. You can find myself, Kyle Goethe, on goatfilmreviews.com. You can check out all my many reviews on there. Follow me online at Almighty Goatman on Twitter, on Instagram. Nick, where can we find you as well?
The St. Paul Filmcast is on all major podcast distributors, and you can find me on Twitter at Palod2.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us, guys, and until next time.